On this episode of Newt's World, I published my latest book this week, Trump's Triumph, America's Greatest Comeback. And I've been talking about it on many news outlets and podcasts all week. And I'm happy to report at this time, it's number 9 in new releases on Amazon. So I thought I would spend a few minutes telling you about the book, why I wrote it, and frankly, encourage you to get a copy. We actually began thinking about this in October because I concluded Trump was going to win and that what we'd lived through was so extraordinary, had so many ups and downs, so many surprises, that putting it in historic context would be really helpful. At the same time, I thought that there's an underlying big story about the movement, the American people, and that's why while the title is Trump's Triumph, the subtitle is America's Greatest Comeback, because in many ways, this was as much a victory for the American people as it was a victory for the singular, unique personality of Donald Trump. And so I wanted to put those together, and we began working on it in October, basically finished it in late February. It's the nature of modern book publishing. It takes forever to get from the initial draft to the final publication. And I was very encouraged because we went back and reviewed it, recognizing how much had happened in the last 5 months. And the only two things we missed didn't occur to us to have a Gulf of America, and it didn't occur to us to want to annex either Greenland or Canada. But other than those things, the rest of it pretty much fits what we wrote in Trump's Triumph, America's Greatest Comeback. So I feel pretty good in sharing with you. I think part of the reason I was able to write this book in this context is that I've known Trump for many years. I first met him when I was speaker in the late 1990s. Calista and I got to know him. We joined Trump National and would see him regularly back long before he was a candidate. And then we first talked to him in February of 2015. We were at an event on national security in Des Moines, Iowa. And he called. We were staying in the Marriott downtown, which is a famous political headquarters, and said, hey, we're all in the same place. Why don't we have breakfast? So Calista and I joined him in February of 2015, talked about running. And you could tell, because we had run in 2012, he was really curious about what did it take, how would you do it, etc. And I kind of had the feeling after that date that he was going to run and paid attention to him from that point on. So I feel like I've been studying Trump for about 10 years. Watching him go through the last 4 years, the loss in 2020, which I think was a rigged election. I don't think it was stolen on Election Day, but I think clearly the national establishment did everything it could to stack the deck to defeat him. I watched him go through 2 impeachment efforts by the House to be turned down by the Senate. I watched the CIA and the FBI lie about him and break the law trying to destroy him. A 2-year Mueller investigation. The amount of stuff that Trump went through was amazing. And then at the very low point in 2021, there was a period there where people sort of thought he was gone, but I never thought that. We knew how tough he was. We knew how dedicated he was to the country. And frankly, we knew how angry he was. And so he began his comeback, and the comeback was amazing. While Trump goes on stage to defeat 16 other Republicans in the 2016 campaign, he defeats every other Republican in 2024 without ever once debating them. And this gets to the point about the American people and why it was also America's greatest comeback. Millions and millions of people had decided that they were for Donald Trump, that Trump was the only person strong enough, clear enough, courageous enough to stand up to the Washington establishment and to truly change it. And these are people going all the way back to Barry Goldwater in 1964, who really deeply believed that the establishment was corrupt, that it had a bunch of left-wing weird values, and that it was trying to change the country to our worst and in many ways undermining and weakening America. So there's this deep sense that the Trumpism was there and that they were going to be for Trump. They didn't care who else ran. They were for Trump. And they were such a huge majority that nobody else could get any traction or get involved. Now, I'd gotten involved with the American First Policy Institute which had been founded by Brooke Rollins, who's now the Secretary of Agriculture, and by Linda McMahon, who's now the Secretary of Education. And it gathered up about 400 people who had worked for Trump and who networked together to spend the 4 years in the wilderness laying out the pattern for where we're going and how we're going to get there. And it was very interesting to me to watch all of these really smart people who, unlike a lot of the think tanks, they weren't writing in theory. They were looking at a very practical level of how would you get this done. And that's why when Trump did finally win, they had such a huge opportunity to change things so rapidly because they spent 4 years laying the base for it. Now, there are a couple of chapters I want to talk about in the book that will fit this. One of them is the Trump mandate. And I think it's important to understand that Trump was in an unusual position that he ran very clearly on what he was going to do. He said he was going to close the border, and he meant it. He said that he was going to take on bad trade policy and move towards using tariffs, and he meant it. He said consistently that he was against boys playing girls' sports, and he meant it. He was consistently in favor of merit and against group identity. When you go back and you look, I think he made 57 videos on different policies. If you look at the platform that was adopted in Milwaukee in the summer of 2024, it's relatively short, it's very specific, and it grows directly out of the America First Policy Institute and directly out of Trump's personal speeches. And he's telling the country up front, if this is what you want, vote for me, but don't be surprised if you vote for me when I do the things I'm telling you. So I think from that standpoint, he really did feel when he won that he had a mandate. Now, he particularly felt he had a mandate because he carried all 7 of the swing states and because he had 2.5 million more votes than Kamala, which, given the weight of California voting, is remarkable. It's very hard for a Republican to win the total national vote because California is so one-sided and so big. But in this particular campaign, he did. Now, notice what he accomplished. And this is part of why it really is a triumph. First, he knocks out the President of the United States. Biden is gone. Then he pivots and he defeats the Vice President of the United States, who, by the way, had twice as much money as he did. That gives you a sense of a mandate. Nobody in American history had ever defeated 2 major candidates in 1 year, but Trump did. And I think that's why he really felt that when he got elected, he was here for a purpose, and the American people had endorsed that purpose, and he was going to act starting on day one with executive orders and with proposed legislation and so forth. And so you've seen, I think, even more than Franklin Roosevelt in 1933, you've seen a remarkably aggressive and active president who from day one has been changing things and has been really imposing in a serious kind of way where he wants to go and how he wants to change the national establishment. And so I think Chapter 3, which is entitled The Trump Mandate, really lays out how Trump uses branding, how he develops things. Remember, this is a guy who for 13 years had The Apprentice on NBC. So he understands how to talk to the average American. He understands how to have a popular TV show. He had made his entire career out of branding things with Trump Tower and Trump golf courses and you name it. And so he's really quite remarkable and different. I always tell people part of him is a vaudevillian. He's back to the old days of vaudeville. He loves getting up in front of 50,000 people and doing things that are effective. It's a rule that Rush Limbaugh had. You had to entertain people before you could educate them, because if you couldn't entertain them, you couldn't keep their attention to educate them. Well, Trump really understands that better than any political candidate I've ever seen. And that's why if you go to one of his rallies, the whole thing is a continuous experience. The big final rally in Madison Square Garden. It was just amazing. It was like being at Barnum and Bailey. I mean, there was something going on all the time. And there was a very wide range of people speaking, including, for example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who up until then had been a Democrat, and clearly brought his Make America Healthy Again policies into the Republican Party, and now, is Secretary of Health and Human Services. So all of these things are going on, and Trump has an instinct for them, and that's part of how he ended up getting the mandate, because he's just an interesting guy. Now, the other thing to remember as he's going through this, while he's earning a mandate, the opposition is really ferocious. I mean, there are 4 different attempts to put him in jail, not just to sue him, but literally to go out to try to see if they can get him convicted and put him in jail. There was a key moment, I think, when he went into the Fulton County Sheriff's Office and they wanted to get a mugshot, and what they got was a very aggressive, very determined picture, which itself became sort of symbolic of Trump and which showed up on all sorts of barbershop walls and became a real symbol of his toughness and the fact that you couldn't wear him out and you couldn't break him down. He then went on to what I think was probably, in some ways, a case study will be made someday. Here's the vice president is out raising tons of money. I mean, the whole national establishment on the left convinces itself that she can win, and I think they pour literally $1 billion in 9 weeks. She has twice as much money as Trump. But Trump does three things that more than offset the money she's raising. First, he goes on Joe Rogan, the most popular podcast in the world, spends 3 hours talking. She does not go on Rogan. She won't go to Austin, Texas to record, which is where he does it. The truth is, she couldn't have handled 3 hours of talking with Joe Rogan if her life depended on it. So Trump gets all of this free entertainment. He's out there all across the audiences. People are writing about it, talking about it. And of course, if you like Rogan, and I think in Trump's case, it was like 60 million listeners, 3 hours of free time, which would cost an amazing amount of money to buy. Then Trump decides he's going to go to a McDonald's and hand out French fries. Now, the genius in this is, remember, 87% of the country goes to McDonald's at least once a year. 87%. Furthermore, 40 million Americans, including Jeff Bezos, worked at McDonald's at one time or another. So Trump has picked probably as clear a symbol of everyday Americans as you could get. And think about the sheer volume of coverage he gets. I mean, every network has Trump handing out French fries. There are stories beforehand. There are stories while he's doing it. There are stories afterwards. You can't buy this kind of publicity. And then to finally cap it all off, Joe Biden says that Trump's supporters are garbage. And the immediate result is that Trump's team finds a garbage truck, puts a Trump sign on it. Trump gets on the truck with, of course, the whole National Press Corps taking pictures. And then as an example of his genius as an entertainer, he goes into this hall with 50,000 people wearing the very colorful vest that was being worn in Milwaukee by garbage collectors. And he says to the audience with a sort of a twinkle, "They tell me I look thinner if I wear this. Maybe I should campaign the rest of the election wearing this vest." Well, it's a shtick, but it's a beautifully done shtick. So here you have three examples in a row where Trump, he's getting more penetration, he's getting more free time, and he's doing it looking very human and not very wooden. Meanwhile, as we now know, you have Kamala Harris paying people to endorse her, $2 million here, $3 million there. I mean, pretty pathetic if you think about it. And she's not getting any traction anywhere. So Trump does win with the mandate. Now, he then moves immediately to control the border, and in the first 30 days, they reduce people being released into the United States by 99.9% in the first 30 days. It's one of the most amazing turnarounds I've ever seen, and I thought it was just an astonishing achievement. Now, at that point, having begun to solve the border, Trump shifts to what I think will be the most important test of his presidency, which I cover in Chapter 5, making America affordable again. The key here is that the price of living was really driving people crazy. Biden clearly didn't have a clue how to get it under control. People really were very worried about the cost of gasoline, the cost of food, the cost of electricity. And so Trump had to arrive and really focus on making America affordable again. And in Chapter 5, I outline all the steps they're taking, which includes dramatically expanding the production of energy to bring down energy prices, and energy prices ultimately work their way through the whole economy. It also includes passing the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is still, as you know, being worked on, but they've made huge progress, and I think they're within 30 to 40 days of getting it done. It includes what he's doing with tariffs, where he is really trying to rebalance the trade relationship with all these countries. But clearly Trump understands that if he can create enough jobs, stabilize the currency, have people have more money in their pocketbook, that things will really be rolling in the right direction, and that will help him in probably the key critical test of his presidency, which is winning in 2026. If he wins in 2026, he will continue to move forward, continue to pass reforms, continue to change Washington. But if the Democrats win the House in 26, we'll be right back to Nancy Pelosi again. We'll have obstruction, we'll have hearings, we'll have investigations, we'll have impeachments. So the 26 election becomes one of the great key moments in the Trump experience. He has to get this bill through because they have to have the economy growing. They have to be producing enough goods and services to bring down prices, and that requires passing the one big, beautiful bill. The other place where I'm really delighted, and I devote Chapter 9 to talking about this, is health and healthcare. Along comes Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the whole concept of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, really begins to catch on and attracts a lot of people who would not have been part of a traditional Republican coalition, but who do believe that we've gone down the wrong track and that far too many Americans are sick and that we need to do something to help everybody have a better future. I was very privileged. I was at the White House announcement of Make America Healthy Again's report on children's health, and it was great to be there with the president and with Secretary Kennedy and the entire cabinet. And in many ways, for me personally, it was a real building block from the book I had written back in 2003, because they're almost exactly the same core issues. I recommend everybody to go to the White House website and get a copy of the MAHA report on children. It will truly stun you. It certainly sobered me up, because we have so many 5-year-olds who are obese, which means when they grow up they'll be obese, which means they'll probably have diabetes, they may well have heart condition, all sorts of bad things. And we have a sick care system, which is really very sophisticated if you are sick, but it doesn't try to keep you healthy. And what we need is a health care system which focuses on doing whatever is necessary in order for us to avoid having to pay for things. Now, when you realize that health care today is about 18% of the economy, literally almost $1 out of every $5 in our economy relates to health care. If you can, in fact, do what Secretary Robert Kennedy is talking about and do what President Trump is talking about, which is to have a system that focuses on keeping people healthy, you could conceivably take at least 4% of the gross domestic product out of the cost of health care, which is currently at about 18%. That change, not cutting health care, not cutting spending, not going in and trying to micromanage, but simply keeping people healthy so they don't need to spend the money because they're not sick. That change would do more to balance the federal budget than any other single change. And that's why I think if you look at Chapter 9, which is called The Enormous Challenge of Health and Healthcare in America, it will really give you a flavor of where they're trying to go, why they're trying to go there, how really important this is, and how much it could dramatically save the lives of people and improve their lives, but at the same time, how it could also have a big impact on the fiscal side. So you both get to save lives and save money, precisely like my book title. Let's look forward. The election of 2026 will be an enormous challenge for President Trump and for the entire MAGA movement. The House is very close, and keeping the House is at the heart of our ability to continue the changes that Trump campaigned on and that the American people voted for. At the same time, the Senate has a fairly narrow margin, 53-47, but the odds are pretty good we'll pick up 1 or 2 seats. And so I'm not as worried about losing the Senate. I think we'll keep the Senate. But the House is a real challenge. Now, the good news is we do know historically that the party in the White House can gain seats. In 1934, Franklin Roosevelt's party gained 9 seats in the House and 9 seats in the Senate. In 1998, President Clinton's party gained 5 seats in the House, and the Senate stayed the same, no loss or gain. In 2002, George W. Bush's party gained 8 seats in the House and 2 seats in the Senate. So we know it's possible. We also know that in the current makeup, there are 13 Democrats in districts that Trump carried, and another 21 Democrats in districts where Trump came within 5%. So if we continue to do well, if we can pass the big, beautiful bill, if we could have a Trump boom by the summer of 2026, if Democrats continue to find themselves as the Obama-Biden party of radicalism, corruption, and dishonesty, I think it's very possible we're going to win. The key is going to be to convince people who normally don't vote in an off year that they have to go vote if they don't want to have the Obama-Biden machine take control of Washington again. And reaching those people who are for Trump, they're not necessarily a Republican, and they don't normally vote except in presidential years, convincing them to turn out may be the absolute key to whether or not we maintain our majority. It's a huge, huge moment. I tried in Trump's Triumph, America's Greatest Comeback, to lay out why I'm an optimist. I think it's very likely we're going to succeed. I think we're likely to have a better government, a better economy, to have more spending money in our pockets and more jobs available. And I think we're likely to have basically solved the immigration crisis. And people, I think, are going to feel pretty good that we're moving in the right direction. It was very striking to me the other day that Rasmussen polling came out and said that for the very first time in the history of the poll, 50% of Americans thought that we were on the right track. They had never, ever gotten to 50% saying we're on the right track. And the head of the Rasmussen poll said he was shocked that he frankly had concluded we would never get a majority of Americans to say we're on the right track. I think we're going to continue down that road. We're going to continue to have people say, you know, this is working, and it is a system that we really want to have strengthened and we want to continue to build on. Now, there are some really big challenges. There's the challenge of dealing with Putin and Russia and its offensive war against Ukraine. There's the challenge of Gaza and Hamas, which continues still to insist that its idea of peace is not a single Jew will remain in Israel. There's the challenge of dealing with the Iranians who chant death to Israel and death to America, and whose dictator, the Ayatollah Khamenei, went on television a few weeks ago and said, I want to reassure all of you that when we say death to America, this is not a slogan, this is our policy, which is, if you think about it, pretty sobering and pretty scary thing to say. So the president has some significant foreign policy challenges. He's also going to have a huge amount of negotiating with countries around the world on tariffs and, frankly, even more important than tariffs, non-trade barriers that some of these countries raise where you just can't sell American products no matter what. That's going to be very tedious, very cumbersome, probably going to have something like 90 countries being negotiated with. And that's going to be a long-running story. It's not going to end overnight. But it is the intelligent use of the American market, which is the largest market in the world, to say to countries that if you want access to our market, you're going to have to quit cheating us. And I think in that sense, the more people understand it, the more they will, in fact, be in favor of what the president's doing. And then, of course, finally, he faces the challenge of China. China is the only potential peer competitor in the world today. It is a huge country. It's actually shrinking, by the way. It's going to be much smaller over the next generation because their one-child policy, I don't think they'd ever thought this through. But if you have a one-child policy, that means that in the next generation, you only have half as many adults as you had in the last generation. Well, that's now really coming home in a big way. And it's conceivable that China will actually shrink until it is a little bit smaller than the United States by late in this century. We continue to gain, they continue to get smaller. But managing the Chinese relationship is much more important in the long run than managing the Russian relationship. And so President Trump does have a series of, I think, very significant challenges. At the same time, we have enormous opportunities. We're beginning to take off in artificial intelligence. We're beginning to take off in robotics. We're beginning to take off in our understanding of biology and the degree to which we can cure diseases and extend life in ways that would seem almost like magic or science fiction if we didn't actually see them happening in front of our very eyes. I think that we have a chance to give our children and grandchildren a dramatically better country with a remarkable future, what Trump has called a golden age. And I think he may be right. I think that by any human standard, this is possibly going to be one of the great periods of invention, one of the great periods of development in American history and in human history. And a good bit of it will come because of the kind of driving entrepreneurial spirit that Donald Trump has. Remember, just a few weeks ago, he went to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, and in 4 short days, he got $1 trillion, not $1 billion, $1 trillion in orders for American goods, and $1 trillion committing to being invested in the United States. Now, those kind of things are going to grow the economy, create jobs, raise the standard of living, and give all of us a dramatically better future. And I have every reason to believe, and this is why I wrote Trump's Triumph, America's Greatest Comeback. I have every reason to believe that he gets it, that he's going to make it work, and that it's going to be just a remarkable time to be alive. I want to let you know that you can order a copy of Trump's Triumph, America's Greatest Comeback, from Amazon.com. And if you email me your Amazon receipt to book@Gingrich360.com, I will mail you a personally autographed bookplate for your copy. So order a copy today and send me your receipt to book@Gingrich360.com. Thank you for listening. You can get a link to buy Trump's Triumph on our show page at newsworld.com. Newsworld is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newsworld, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newsworld can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at Gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newsworld.